Jimmy was a very naughty, naughty little boy. Seemed like he was always getting in trouble. He was always getting in trouble at school. He was always getting in trouble at home. He even got into trouble almost every Sunday when his parents took him to church. Jimmy's dad was only half joking when he said, "I'm afraid that boy's going to end up in prison someday." One day at school, Jimmy got sent to the principal's office again. After he'd been bowled out and came back out, one of the older kids in his elementary school, a guy a couple of grades ahead, came up to him and said, "Jimmy, did you get sent to the office again?" And Jimmy said, "Uh-huh." And the older boy said, "Ho, ho, ho, ho. Now, Santa's not going to bring you any presents this year." "Yes, he will," said Jimmy. The older boy said, "No. What Santa does to bad kids like you is he brings coal and fills up their stocking with that." Jimmy didn't believe him. He said, "No way." But then that night when he got home, one of his dad's friends was there. And he asked his dad's friend, "What do you do, Mr. Jones?" And Mr. Jones said, "Well, I'm a coal miner, Jimmy." And he decided to tease Jimmy a little, and he said, "I'm the one who digs up the coal that Santa takes to all the bad children." Well, now Jimmy had to take this a little more seriously because he'd been told about it by an adult, and so it might be true. And he started to worry a little bit. And then a couple of weeks later, Jimmy wasn't supposed to turn the TV on after 8 o'clock at night, but he figured he could get away with it because his parents were upstairs. They wouldn't hear anything. So he turned on the TV, and there was a variety show where people were singing Christmas songs. And he heard a song, "Santa brings a lot of toys to really good, good girls and boys. But if your behavior is quite shocking, Santa will put coal in your stocking." And now Jimmy was really worried. And then a terrifying thought occurred to him. "Mommy and Daddy know about some of the bad things I've done this year, but they don't know about all the bad things I've done this year. If Santa comes and puts coal in my stocking, I'm going to be in big, big trouble." Well, Christmas Eve finally came, and Jimmy's parents thought he seemed unusually subdued. Usually he'd be getting excited because he knew Santa was coming in the morning. Finally, it was time for bed, and his mom said, "Jimmy, time to go to sleep. You'll be up extra early, I'm sure, because Santa will have been here." Well, Jimmy had a hard time going to sleep. He was scared. The next morning, he didn't want to get out of bed, afraid of what he might find. Finally, his mother came into the room and said, "Jimmy, get up. It's time for breakfast." Jimmy slowly walked downstairs, afraid of what he'd find. But much to his amazement, his stocking was full of gifts. He'd wanted a football, and he got that. He'd gotten a Monopoly game he wanted. And under the Christmas tree was the bicycle he'd wanted. Oh, Santa had come after all, and he hadn't brought coal. Jimmy was so happy. He'd had such a good Christmas. But I'm afraid Jimmy didn't learn a very good lesson from that Christmas. What he learned was that he really didn't need to be good because Santa would come anyway. And when he got to be 16, Jimmy was arrested for stealing cars. Now just think how much better things might have turned out if Santa actually would have come and put coal in his stocking and taught him a valuable lesson. But now Jimmy sits in jail, and he'd really appreciate it if you send him a Christmas card.
If you were to go deep, 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 deep into the woods, you would find the land where only children live. And just north of the land where only children live is where Father Christmas lives. Christmas is a special time in this land. The children have so many traditions that they cherish. On Christmas Eve, they all gather for a sumptuous meal, followed by their favorite Christmas sweet treats. And then they all stand in a circle, holding hands, singing verse after verse of their favorite Christmas songs, swinging their arms together as if they were one. And then when it begins to get dark, they put on their snow pants and their boots and their winter jackets and their scarves and their hat and mittens, and they go out into the snowy woods. And there in the woods, they look up into the branches of the trees and the bushes beneath them, and they see the gifts that Father Christmas has brought them to choose to give to one another. Oh, you might choose a shiny fire engine for your cousin, or a coloring book and a box of sharp crayons to give to your twin sister. You might even have to climb up into a tree to get the shiny top for your buddy, even if he is ornery sometimes. Or draped over a bush, you might find a cluster of colorful satin hair ribbons to give to your best friend who lives across the street and down one house. The children would gather one gift after another and put them in their bags and carry them home. And then on Christmas morning, they would go out and visit their loved ones and give them the gifts that they had chosen. It was such a celebration. Now, there was one year when a grown-up made his way to the land where only children live. Now, the grown-up arrived at Christmas time, and so the grown-up heard all about the Christmas traditions here in this land. At first, the grown-up merely listened, but after a while, in one of his conversations, the grown-up said, "Don't you think it would make more sense for you to just pick the gifts that you want for yourself? I mean, what if you pick a gift for somebody and it's the wrong size, or it's not their favorite color, or maybe she has one just like it at home already?" Well, at first, the children were aghast. This is not how it's done. This isn't how we do it. But the more they thought about it, the more their heads would fill with those things that they might choose for themselves. That certain skateboard, or a stuffed animal, or a telescope. And that's all the children could think about. All except for Michael. Michael was not concerned with what he might choose for himself. All he could think about is his sister Sarah. She had turned her ankle, and he knew that she would never be able to make the walk out into the woods, let alone climb up into a tree or under a bush. So this time, when Christmas Eve came, the children sat at the meal and ate very quickly. They didn't even bother with the sweet treats, and they only sang one verse of one Christmas song before they threw on their boots and their jackets. They didn't even bother to zip them up, and they ran outside to go to the woods. And when they got to the woods, they looked up into the trees and into the bushes, and they saw nothing. They got together, they made a plan. You go north and we'll go south, and you go east and we'll go west, and we'll scour the woods looking for these gifts that Father Christmas brought for us. But when they got back together, no one had found a single gift. Now the small children, they were disappointed. But the older children, they were aggravated. Father Christmas had not brought their gifts for them this year, and they wanted to know the reason. Just then they saw Michael coming out of the woods with a sack thrown over his shoulder. They taunted him, "Hey, Michael, what you got in there, rocks and a bunch of branches?" Michael didn't understand their comment, and he just wished them a Merry Christmas as he headed home. The next morning, Michael gave Sarah the gifts that he had chosen for her. A doll with a pretty blue dress that matched its eyes, and a red coat that had 2 rows of brass buttons, and a picture book that had pictures of beautiful sights from all over the world. She loved everything that he had chosen for her. But the other children, overnight, their aggravation had turned to downright anger, and they wanted answers. And so they all started heading north to Father Christmas's house. And now, normally, they would never bother Father Christmas on December 25th, or even for a couple weeks after, because they knew that this was a very busy time for him. But they wanted to know why he had not brought gifts this year. And so when they got there, they pounded on his door and pounded until finally a groggy Father Christmas answered the door and said, "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," they said. "You didn't bring us any gifts, old man. Did you forget, or are you just too lazy?" Well, Father Christmas was stunned by what they had said and how they had said it. "No," he said, "I brought the gifts just as I always do." "No, you didn't," they said. "We scoured the whole woods and looked in every tree and under every bush, and there was not a single gift to be found." Really, not a single gift. Just then, Father Christmas noticed Michael at the back of the crowd. He had tagged along mostly out of curiosity, and Father Christmas caught his eye and said, "Michael, did you find any gifts in the woods?" "Yes," said Michael, "I found gifts just as I do every year." "Oh, so that's it. You're playing favorites. You leave gifts for Michael, but not for the rest of us." "No," said Father Christmas. "I filled the trees and the bushes with gifts, just as I have every Christmas. But it was only Michael who was able to find them, for Michael went looking for gifts for another."
My mother has had this Christmas tradition ever since I was a wee young boy. And she's always wanted to do this Christmas tradition all by herself. And it starts for her sometimes in August or September, where she goes out and she starts buying Christmas gift wrap and ribbons and bows and all the different things that she's going to need to decorate all the Christmas gifts for that upcoming Christmas beautifully. She's very meticulous about it. And she makes sure that the wrap looks just so. And some years she has themes for the wrap, where the wrap might have all angels on it one year, or every present might have Santa Clauses on it that year. Or sometimes the gifts are all wrapped in paper that's all red and white stripes, and all the gifts are red and white stripes. She's very meticulous about doing that Christmas gift wrapping, and she just loves it so much to turn each gift into its own little work of art. And then on Christmas Eve day, she takes all those gifts and she lines them up underneath the Christmas tree, and she gets them set up just so. And then when the sun sets that Christmas Eve night, she lights the Christmas tree and turns all the other lights in the room dark, and has my father come in with his camera and take a beautiful photo of those beautiful wrapped gifts underneath the Christmas tree. Now, I've always had that same impression about Christmas gift wrapping and what it means to me. But I got to thinking about what Christmas gift wrap might have been like in years gone by, back in a different time of American history. And so I wanted to tell you a little story today about that. And this story is about a man whose name was Lewis Hughes. Lewis Hughes was born in 1832, and he was born on a plantation not too far outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. Lewis's mother was a slave woman on the plantation, and his father was a white man. And when Lewis was about 12 years old in 1844, 15 or so years before the Civil War started, he was asked to come with the plantation owner and another group of slaves and travel to Richmond in early November. And when they got to Richmond in early November, Lewis was sold at a slave market held there in Richmond. Now, Lewis didn't know much about what was going to happen, but he was sold to a man named Edward McKee. And Edward McKee was a big cotton plantation owner who had this big cotton plantation in a town called Potoncoto, Mississippi. So Lewis and the other group of slaves that were sold that day started on a journey in early November, walking from Richmond, Virginia, all the way to Pontotoc, Mississippi, to the plantation where they were now about to live. They arrived at that plantation on Christmas Eve morning. And when they got there, Lewis was told by Mr. McKee, the plantation owner, to come join him at the front door of the plantation home. When he got there, Mr. McKee took a bright-colored plaid shirt, bright and colorful, and asked Lewis to put that shirt on. And then he invited Lewis to come inside the plantation home with him. When he got inside, he was inside a place that like anything he'd ever seen before, for he had never been in a plantation house before. And it was beautiful and immaculate with big rooms. And Mr. McKee took Lewis into this family sitting room where the entire family was gathered on that Christmas Eve day to start their celebration of the holidays. Mr. McKee asked Lewis to step forward, and wearing that bright plaid-colored shirt, he told Lewis to stand up straight and smile. And then he presented Lewis to Mrs. McKee, the madam of the plantation, as her Christmas gift that year. Now later that day, Lewis was given a large wooden plank and an old quilt, and he was told to go into the dining room where he would sleep that night. The next morning was Christmas morning, and the family had a tradition of drinking eggnog on Christmas morning before they ate their breakfast. So Lewis was woken early and was put to work in the kitchen, watching the cook and the housemaid froth all the egg whites up and beat and mix all of the egg yolks with sugar and brandy and pour this eggnog concoction into these fine little porcelain glasses. And the cook sprinkled a little nutmeg on the top and then set those little porcelain glasses on a large silver tray. And Lewis was told to take that silver tray into the sitting room and serve all of the family members their morning nutmeg before their breakfast. After the family had had their breakfast, and Lewis was given a little bit of breakfast himself, the housemaid came to him with his own little porcelain glass and told him that the nutmeg inside that beautifully wrapped little glass was his Christmas gift from the family, and he could enjoy that drink himself. Now, as that day went on, things got very busy at the house, and it wasn't too much longer in the afternoon when the house cook went out the back door of the house, and the housemaid joined him, and all of the slaves from the plantation came running up to the back of the house. They were there to receive their Christmas rations from Mr. McKee and the cook and the housemaid. Each slave was handed a bag having a pint of flour in it and a little bit of bacon and a little bit of lard, their Christmas rations for that year. Now the slaves loved to take that flour and loved to take that lard and make these biscuits that they called Johnny Seldom biscuits. They named them that because they seldom got those beautiful, excellent tasting biscuits, and it didn't happen very often. When that was all done, Lewis was called back into the house to finish his chores for the day. That meant that he had to go and dust all the furniture in the sitting room and in the dining room, and he had to sweep all the floors and arrange all the furniture back to where it should be. And then as night fell, he got his wooden plank out again and set it on the dining room floor and grabbed his old quilt and laid down to go to sleep. It was not too long before the sun rose in the early morning that Lewis was woken up by a tapping on the dining room window, and he went to the window to see what was going on. He looked out, and standing outside the dining room window, he saw an old slave. And that old slave said to Lewis, "Tell Mr. McKee that Uncle Jimmy's back, that Uncle Jimmy has returned." So Lewis did exactly what he was told. And he went to find Mr. McKee, the plantation owner, and he told Mr. McKee, "Uncle Jimmy has returned." Well, the plantation owner sent Lewis to go find the overseer of all the slaves to tell him that same message. And that's what Lewis did. At that time, Lewis found out that Uncle Jimmy was a slave that had been on the plantation for many, many years, but several months before had run away from the plantation to try to escape to the north. But when Uncle Jimmy couldn't get his way to the north, he decided to return and come back to the plantation in the hope of getting his own Christmas rations if he returned by Christmas Day. Now, the overseer and Mr. McKee, the plantation owner, took Uncle Jimmy to a small hillside at the back of the plantation, and they had him lay face down on the ground on that small hillside between 4 stakes that were driven into the ground. They tied his hands and his feet to those 4 stakes, and the overseer and Mr. McKee, the plantation owner, got out a bullwhip and some peach tree switches and whipped Uncle Jimmy as he lay there on the ground. After that had finished, the overseer asked another slave to come over to Uncle Jimmy, and he gave that other slave an old burlap blanket, and he told that slave, "Wrap Uncle Jimmy in that burlap blanket and set him beneath the pine tree at the corner of the cow lot so he can recover there from his whooping that he just received for coming back to the plantation after running away." That scene of Uncle Jimmy wrapped in a burlap bag underneath that pine tree was not a scene worth taking a photo of, like my father had taken photos of the packages wrapped under our own Christmas tree.
After church on the first Sunday of Advent, Stevie was inspired. And so after Sunday dinner, he went up to his room to pray. "Dear Jesus, this is Stevie. I have been a very good boy this year, and I deserve a bicycle. Amen." Well, the week did not go very well. Stevie got in trouble at school because he took a ball from Josiah on the playground, and then he got in trouble at home because he didn't clean his room when his parents had told him to. And so after church on the second Sunday of Advent, when he came home, he knew he had to pray a slightly different prayer. "Dear Jesus," this is Stevie, "I was pretty good this year. I think it was good enough so that I could have a bicycle. Amen." But the next week was worse. Mrs. Gardner sent a note home because Stevie had said a bad word at school. And when he was bickering with his little sister Kirsten, he actually hit her. Oh, he was going to be in trouble. And so when Stevie came home on that third Sunday of Advent, he prayed a different prayer. "Dear Jesus, this is Stevie. I promise that I will be good next year if you bring me a bicycle. Amen." But the next week was even worse. Every time Stevie turned around, he was getting in trouble. He knew that his chances of getting that bicycle were getting smaller and smaller by the day. He was very despondent when he came home from church on that fourth Sunday of Advent, but he went up to his room to ponder what it was that he might do to improve his chances of getting that bicycle after all. And as he was pondering that, he noticed that there was snow falling out of the sky, and Stevie thought of that almost life-size nativity that was set up in front of the front doors of the church just 5 blocks away. And he imagined that there was snow piling up on the crowns of those wise men and that the sheep's faces had probably disappeared altogether. And then he thought of that adoring mother looking down at her infant child. And then Stevie had an idea. he went down to the garage and he got his red wagon and he put in it some of the blankets that his father kept there for when he hauled things in the truck. And he pulled that wagon down the sidewalk to the church 5 blocks away. When he got there, he took the blankets out of the wagon and he walked up to that Mother Mary and he brushed the snow off of her shoulders and her head, the top of her head. And then he wrapped his arms around her in an embrace and picked her up and carried her over to that wagon and set her in the wagon. He picked up one blanket and draped it over her from one side and another blanket and draped it from the other side, so she was completely protected from the snow. And then Stevie pulled that wagon all the way home to his house. He pulled it right into the backyard and right into the garden shed. And when the wagon was parked in there safely, he closed the doors and locked them. He went up to his room and he prayed one more prayer. Dear Jesus, this is Stevie. I've got your mother, and if you ever want to see her again, you're going to bring me that bicycle. Amen.